Good morning. It's still morning. It's 11:30, so we still have another 30 minutes of morning as everybody is joining in from the waiting room. I'd like to welcome for joining us today. Special thanks to Ray Van Dyke, who will be leading today's very interesting workshop on famous tech deals in history and lessons for today. Ray has been leading a series of webinars for us on various topics in intellectual property. Many of them very, very interesting. So thank you very much for doing this for us. As people are joining in, I'd like to ask everyone to please submit your questions throughout the webinar via the Q&A function. And Ray also has plans to use chat in today's session, so he will provide more instructions for that. So both Q&A and chat will be used. So if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them. Other than that, I think we can begin. Ray, I'm gonna let you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your background and get going. I'm gonna turn my video and my microphone off, but I am here in the background.
Okay, thank you very much, Ala. I'm with chat and things like that, Ala. Please feel free to, if they build up, to interrupt and then let me know what they are, because I might get caught up in the heat of this. I'm thankful to be giving these series of talks for the Maryland, University of Maryland, and I am happy to do so. And as for it being very entertaining, thank you very much. I try to make these things entertaining. But anyway, I am Ray Van Dyke. I'm an intellectual property / patent practitioner. I'm in the Washington, D.C. and Maryland area. And I gathered these materials in connection with the history of innovation and topics of that nature that I'm writing a book on. And I'm on American innovation. So anyway, hope you enjoy it. There are countless stories of this nature in our history involving the leverage of intellectual property to make a profit with wide disparity in the finding of success or of course not. Today we'll look at a variety of these scenarios from history that showed differing outcomes. Okay, I hope you enjoy it. Okay, disclaimer is that I'm going to be mentioning some companies here and there in history. These things may have changed over time and everything, so I have the utmost respect for any companies I'm going to mention here, and I just need to give that disclaimer. Okay. Okay, and the machine is not, there we go. So anyway, we're going to look at some things that how not to deal with a huge success, okay? And we're going to look at the successful non-businessman. And we're going to look at situations, is there a deal or no deal? Well, what's going on? And then there's Pyrrhic and other victories, okay? So how do you not deal with a huge success? Okay, let's look at a famous inventor here. Eli Whitney. He got one of the first of the United States patents. And his history is very interesting. He was a self-made man, and he was a tinkerer. He was good with his building things, good with his hands. All right, he could fix. Look at the historical records on this. You keep seeing the phrase, he can fix anything. All right. So he got a scholarship to Yale, but he was an old man, so to speak, when he got his degree at 20. So he graduated from Yale and he got a teaching position, okay? And he procured a position down in South Carolina. So he was traveling there. While he was traveling, he met the widow of the Revolutionary War general and hero, Nathaniel Greene, okay? So he got some good connections on his trip down there. So anyway, he arrived at his teaching position, but they said, oh, sorry, we can only pay you half of what we had agreed upon. Well, he did not go for that at all. So while he met along the way with Widow Greene, she suggested that, if he wasn't doing otherwise, she could, be happy to have him come and stay at her plantation and maybe study for the law there or something of that nature. So he thought, okay, I'll do that. So he goes down there to South Carolina and he meets with the people there and he learns more about what the economy there is. Again, this is just after the Revolutionary War, all right, 1780s, 90s period, okay? So they don't have a money crop. This is early. The cotton was not king at this point. This is very early. At that point, there was some cotton plants, but it was extremely laborious to separate the fibers of the cotton from the seeds. The seeds were just so ingrained in there that it was very difficult. It would take one person, typically a slave, a long time just to get a little bit of cotton. And so there wasn't that much farming of it. You would farm only a little bit because you could only get a yield of so much from that. Okay, so it was not a money crop at all in the South at that time. So Mrs. Green said to her guys, quote, "Gentlemen, apply to my young friend, Mr. Whitney. He can make anything." All right. So Eli Whitney, who when he up in New England and everything, when he was young, he could fix anything, build anything. So he studied the problem, right? And he developed a fairly simple solution, yet an ingenious one. So it was pretty much a rotary brush. It was turned by hand. There was no electricity or anything, so you turn it by hand, and there's brushes there that sort of strip away the fibers from the cotton material, leaving the seeds behind. So anyway, it was astounding to the people that were there that night. He ran a demo of how it worked. He spent about 2 weeks studying the problem and coming up with this solution. It amazed everyone. All right, it 50 times for more efficiency. All right, from one person going in with their fingers and getting all these seeds out, this increased the throughput 50 or more times. You can imagine, word spread fast. It went viral, so to speak. And interesting thing that happened was that a lot of land speculation, land that had just gone fallow because they didn't have a money crop, suddenly was all planted with this green cotton seed. All right. So enormous amount of speculation was going on there about this cotton. So what happened? Eli Whitney tried to, again, he was just visiting the widow Green. He didn't go down there to make a business. So suddenly he's seeing that other people are making his device. It's spreading throughout South Carolina into Georgia and other areas. It was something that could be created relatively easy if once you see how it operates. So anyway, he tried to set up a business, but there was immediate piracy going on. All right, it was out of control. It was barely an idea, and all of a sudden it proliferated enormously. So he tried, like I said, to get his own manufacturing going and to fight these, I can't call them infringers yet because I think it was just before the patent laws came into effect. So they were pirates. And since he around this time, or shortly after, he had actually applied for his patent. So soon, he couldn't go after the individuals and it spread more widely. His model, he thought, was going to be to license the machines and get a percentage of the yield. Okay, so each machine, if it would produce 50 pounds of cotton, he would get 1-2% or whatever of the value of that. All right. Had he got that model, he would have been a multi-millionaire at that time. All right. But at that point, there was just far too much infringement. Eventually, it got so bad he had to sue each state, all right, as an entity, all the people in that state infringing his device. And he was able to get some settlements that way, but it dragged on for quite some time. And in 1804, Congress passed a special law to help him out as well. But it was just, he pretty much went bankrupt at that point. Later, he did achieve some success with another invention of his, which you don't normally hear about. But the early United States needed, especially the Army in the early 1800s, needed guns. And at that time in history, each individual, this is before Colt and all the other people, at this time in history, the technology was such that each gun was specially made. All right. You could not take the parts of one gun and put it in another gun. They would not fit. They were all specially made. So what Eli Whitney did was he developed new milling tools and other kinds of techniques so that you could get a degree of tolerance for these components. All right. So with that, he was able to make these pieces of a gun interchangeable. All right. So he could develop an assembly line. All right. Sort of like what Henry Ford did later on. So this was a new concept. This tied in at the time a lot with Alexander Hamilton's notion and his seminal paper on the American system of manufacture. So Eli Whitney was a success story in this regard, and he achieved quite a bit of financial success with this invention. But the cotton gin was something that was a little bit more problematic. So here, I'm sorry, he lost control of it. He sued the states. And later success in manufacturing firearms. Sorry about that. But anyway, that's an example of his patent that he got later on. And it's one of the first patents in the United States. All right. So anyway, just look at this. It was a transformative idea that he had. It completely filled an enormous pent-up need. All right. And there were immediate ramifications of this. The land was cultivated, and it transformed the South. The idea was too big to contain, especially with greed and piracy going on. And the early U.S. at the time, again, just before the patent laws, was a bit lawless in this regard. Tough to get justice on this. And this is typical of many earlier first inventors out there. You often do not do well, all right, because of this very nature. The big boys come in and tackle it. In part 2 of this type of lecture that I'm giving, I'm going to talk about another company similar this. They came up with a new idea and then had to deal with competition. So today, you know, my wife is pointing out another product, a sling, or it's a fanny pack for men or whatever, that they didn't get a patent on it, and all of a sudden somebody just copied it directly. All right, it is exact copy. So some products can become so huge and go viral so quickly. So you're facing some of the ideas and problems that Eli Whitney had. So as an inventor in this kind of a situation, you do your best to get patent and trade secret protection. All right, with Eli Whitney, again, he wasn't thinking of these things. But I tell people, new clients and everything, have you talked about this? This is one of the first things that comes out of my mouth when I'm talking to a new client. Have you talked about this invention with anyone? Okay, because not only can somebody run out there and copy it perhaps, but you also, it interferes with some of your patent rights if you've talked about it before you file something for it. So with Eli Whitney and other types of inventions of this sort, it's imperative to try to control the distribution of the device, or keep parts of it a trade secret, or something of that nature. Now, I added this slide because it is an example of one of the more modern inventions that goes viral, so to speak. And this is a guy named Josh Malone. He created the bunch of balloons. Now, you may know this device, or you may have seen it on television, mostly from the piracy that went on of his invention. But as an example of his invention there, you know, you have a yard party with kids and everything, you wanted to fill up the balloons. Previously, you would fill up one balloon. You get the hose and fill up another. It took a long time. Well, Josh would sell this pack at the top. There is an example of the pack. And it would have all these balloons all configured, like 50 of them or whatever, to fit onto a garden hose and be filled up simultaneously. So all the kids get balloons all at the same time. So this is a 63-year-old problem, apparently. It was a huge hit, huge. And it was an instant copier. It was primarily one or two players in this area, But they really did him dirty in many ways. A massive amount of litigation. Josh fought back. Something Eli Whitney tried to do, but with some success. But Josh fought back a lot, and he was ultimately successful after suffering for many years in this regard. And they had to do with some of these new procedures that the patent office put in there called inter partes reviews. And in my view, this was abuses of that system that Josh had to deal with, and massive amount, dozens of litigations. Pretty much, again, only one or two major players, but they kept bringing these things constantly to undermine him. But ultimately, his patent survived all of these challenges, and he got this massive award, and I can't be more pleased. I know him personally. So let's look now at a successful non-businessman, okay? So that's Thomas Alva Edison, okay? He was a extraordinarily prolific inventor, all right? He is, of all inventors in the United States, he has the most patents, almost 1,100. All right. He was good at perfecting what was out there. All right. Things like the telegraph, he made it better. The telephone, he made it better. Electric light, he made it better. And also in creating the totally new. All right. Like the talking machines. So anyway, he had an impact on many technologies for things like the light bulb. All right. It was a lot of effort. There was a previous efforts in this regard. Edison improved upon these previous efforts that were not successful because the light wouldn't last long, it would fail or whatever. He would perform thousands of experiments. You know, ultimately with this, it was a carbon filament that worked in this. But a lot of the technology was built on an earlier lamp by a guy named Walter Nernst. All right. So Edison, his new device, immediately caught on to great success. Okay. It supplanted Nernst and anybody else in the area. And Edison went on to great acclaim for this. Some years later, Nernst visited Edison at his shop in Menlo Park, New Jersey, and asked him, "How much did you make on your electric lamp invention?" Edison looked at him and said, "Not a dime," because what he would do, being at this time, he would plow all his money back into R&D and things like that. So in Edison's view, he didn't make a dime on it. Okay, Nernst looked at Edison and said, "I made $250,000." So it was an interesting thing. So another thing that Edison created was the phonograph. Now, we don't really think about how transformative that this was at the time, but he was a visionary for doing this. You know, up until this point, if you wanted to hear music or any sound of the past, you had to play it on a machine, a piano, a violin, or whatever. So that's why families had to have one of the children or all of them skilled in music, because that was a form of entertainment. So at Edison, he created a device where you could play music, where you can play sounds. You can record the things off of Alexander Graham Bell's or Meucci's new device, the telephone. So it was an incredible thing. So he told his friends at this time what he was doing, and they laughed at him. So months later, Edison played "Mary Had a Little Lamb" to them, and they were like, "Oh my God." So again, his technology built on Alexander Graham Bell's technology. He improved it and made it better. All right. And he also had alternative non-infringing aspects of Bell's telephone also, but elements of that went into the phonograph. Edison was most proud of this invention. So, okay. Early in his youth, however, Edison worked for other people. Okay, even though he's a prolific inventor, he had to start somewhere. So early on, this is just after the Civil War. Okay, he was into telegraphy. Again, Morse had come out with the telegraph in the 1830s, and it was used extensively in the Civil War. And now it was being used in many commercial aspects, including the stock market. All right, critical to get this information around. So Edison became known as the fastest of the punching the Morse code and getting the information out. All right, that was his goal, to be the best. And you had a Black Friday in 1869, and Western Union and others. That's where he was working at that time. A lot of people's fortunes were lost. There were a lot of suicides, and Edison, while working at Western Union, realized that there's actual money to be made in this technology for this. All right. Instead of playing the risky stock market, he could create devices for the stock market. And he had ideas for these inventions. So he patented a new improved stock ticker. All right. It was for the Gold and Stock Telegraph Company. Okay. So he worked on this, and he started to negotiate a sale, and he's thinking to himself, how much am I going to get for this? Again, he was a young man at this point in his 20s, and he thought, I'll ask for 5, but I'll settle for 3. But impetuously, he thought, let me see. He turned it back on the company and said, well, how much will you give me for it? And they said, how about 40,000? Well, Edison's jaw, oh my God, it shocked him. And he went to the bank and got it all out in small bills, took it home, and kept it in his place. But he got worried at that point, and it soon went back to the bank and deposited the money in the bank where it'd be safer. But anyway, he was not a businessman, all right, but he made countless deals, right, starting with this one. And he made deals with electricity and things like that, later on with Westinghouse and his battles with Westinghouse and Tesla and alternating and direct current. So even though he was not a businessman, he was involved extensively with these deals. Overall, primarily because of his being so prolific and visionary, he was successful, right? But he had a lot of losses as well. So let's look at another situation where you have a deal or no deal. All right, it sometimes has ramifications. So let's go back to the early ages of the computer industry. I should say the software and the personal computer industry. Computers have been around since the 30s in essence, and they only started with miniaturization of the components becoming available as a personal computer in the 70s. Okay, let's go back to 1975. Okay, Bill Gates was at Harvard. All right, so he sees the January 1975 Popular Electronics article on the Altair 8800, and there's a picture of it there at the left, and then there's the picture of the article of the magazine that Bill Gates and Paul Allen read about. And they had been heavily involved in school in Seattle with this, knowing that this was going to happen. They weren't sure when it was going to happen, but they knew it was going to happen. In other words, the personal computer industry. Up at this time, machines, if you wanted to use a computer, you had to buy time on what's now called a MIDI computer, a PDP-11 or something like that, where these computers were at some corporations and things were maybe available for a timeshare kind of a situation where you would take your programs and run them. I was a young boy at this time, and I was in a computer club, and you had punch cards and things like that, and I would give them to the instructor, and the instructor would take them and have them run by this outside computer. But Bill Gates and others realized this is all going to come into the home. All right. So MITS was the company, Micro Instrumentation Telemetry Systems. They made a bunch of things, but they thought, well, let's make this little computer. Now, the Altair was not much to look at. What you see on the front there is the entire computer. These are lights that are blinking, and you had to be able to understand what the blinking lights meant. All right. And it was an assembler language. I mean, it was a very complicated thing. It was not for the novice at all, but it represented the future. It was the first programmable consumer mini computer, the first one that a hobbyist could buy and use in their home. This was a big thing. All right. So Gates and Allen, Gates dropped out of Harvard, and with Allen, his buddy, went to Albuquerque. That was the home of MITS and where this Altair was being manufactured. And with Allen, Gates starts writing code for these machines, these new machines, and mostly basic computer language. So there's a picture of Bill Gates while he was in Albuquerque. He was involved in some mischief. Again, he was a kid. He was 17, 18 years old or so. So he got into some mischief. But importantly, he saw an opportunity, and he seized that opportunity. And, we can all have our own feelings of Bill Gates, especially now in the pandemic and all that. But I mean, over the years and everything, at this time, you have to give him credit for seeing the opportunity and seizing upon it. Somebody had to be first, and he was damn sure it was going to be him. So after, with MITS and everything, they got their sea legs, so to speak, on writing and becoming a little company and all this other stuff. So they went to Seattle, his hometown, and they formed Microsoft later that year. So at Microsoft, he would write software for these devices that are out there, like the Altair, and things were creeping up after the Altair, mostly the basic computer language. Now, I have to talk a little bit about computers so you understand this. Computers, they have these programs like BASIC that'll run on them, but the computer has to have a master program, or it's called an operating system. How do you interface the outside world to the physical components of the device itself? There has to be an interface, and that's called an operating system. Early operating systems operated on floppy disks, okay? In the 1970s, there was this, what's called a standard developed, CPM, which stands for Control Program for Microcomputers, okay? This was a very simple set of code that would allow you to interact with the machine and run programs, okay? It was written by a guy named Gary Kildall, and he was CEO of a company that, this was its real name, the Intergalactic Digital Research, Inc., DRI, all right? So anyway, it was a big thing at the time, the CPM. So the Altair that Bill Gates was working on used CPM, okay, as did other computer manufacturers that popped up like Osborne, Sharp, and others later on in the 70s. So the first Microsoft product was BASIC. Again, that was for the Altair. At that time, Intel, which makes the processor chips or the number cruncher for these computers, had come out with the 8080, all right, 8-bit, in the mid 74. Okay, so Kildall at that time separately was trying to work with Intel, saying, "Hey, Intel, maybe you want to buy my operating system." And he offered him $20,000. Intel was into making chips. They didn't think about the software, and they said no. Okay. Intel went ahead a few years later and came up with the new Intel 8086 processor. This was a game changer. All right. This created the 86 line of architecture, hugely successful. All right. Kildall had written CPM, so it interacted with the old chip 8080, but he was a little slow in updating it and making it interactive with this other chip, the new chip. So this keys into what happens. So IBM, now we enter into another big player at this time, which is key to the story. IBM at this time, this is the late 70s, they are feeling like they're being left behind. They were king in the mainframe and in most of the middies, but they just felt they were losing out here, and they wanted to be sure that they were involved in the microcomputer revolution that's coming. Okay, but they had a way of doing things. All right, the Big Brother, they were called. All right, and Steve Jobs famously had that commercial about that. So they suffered competition in the MIDI computer industry. So they thought, let's try to head off the path and get involved in this and get dominance in this burgeoning PC marketplace. So they developed what they called a skunk works in Boca Raton, Florida, okay, where they were going to create the IBM PC, right? And this was in 1980. This piece of hardware requires software and an operating system, all right? So IBM didn't want to get involved with that. They just wanted to make the physical device. So they went to Washington and met with Bill Gates, okay? And Bill Gates willingly, eagerly licensed them software for using the BASIC interpreter and other software that Microsoft had at that time. Interestingly, Gates was able to give IBM a non-exclusive license. Now, there's a difference between non-exclusive license and exclusive license, of course. A non-exclusive license means that IBM can use it, but Bill Gates can license it to anybody else as he sees fit. IBM normally wanted exclusivity, so he had to give kudos to Gates for managing this, all right, keeping IBM at bay, so to speak. But again, maybe they just didn't want to be involved in software and they didn't care. But again, these have consequences. But Gates didn't have an operating system. All right. Again, everybody's relying on CP/M. Gary Kildall at this time. So Gates told IBM, you got to go see Gary Kildall. All right, get his CP/M, and then we're all good. But Gates knew about Kildall. He knew other things, and he's thinking, he started thinking at this point how he could expand Microsoft. So IBM set the meeting with Kildall, and here's the deal or no deal. All right, the suits arrive. Big Brother arrives at the Kildall house. And, but there was a problem. They weren't used to this. His wife was there, oddly enough. He was not. All right. Whether it was purposeful or by accident or whatever, we're not sure. All right. So IBM did things the way they normally did, like they did with Gates. They immediately gave him a non-disclosure agreement. Again, they had the skunk works going on. They don't want any details of this to get out. So they wanted a non-disclosure agreement so that in this case, DRI or Gary and Dorothy would abide by this and keep it secret. So Dorothy felt uncomfortable with this. She didn't like it. Didn't like the way IBM was operating. And it bothered her. And for hours, IBM tried to make this happen, but no deal. She wouldn't sign it. So IBM left. All right. So IBM was unhappy. At this time, again, Gates was thinking, he had an idea. Gates mentioned IBM. IBM talked to Gates and said, what's the deal here? We need an operating system. So Gates said, I might have one for you. Hold on. So Gates, soon after that, signed a contract with IBM in November of that year for an operating system. Right? There was another operating system out there. All right, it was created by the Seattle Computer Products Company. All right, they sold microcomputer motherboards, and if you're running this hardware, you need something to interact with it. Again, a master program or an operating system. So they had something they were using. So the Seattle Computer Products Company, or SCP, hired Tim Patterson, that's his picture down there, to write a new operating system for this so that they could, assess the motherboards and figure out the hardware was working. So Tim Patterson wrote it, and this quick and dirty one, and that's what he called it, quick and dirty operating system, QDOS. All right, it was a clone pretty much of CP/M, and there were allegations of copying, and they were unproven over time, but nonetheless, it was very similar. Okay, and Patterson later joined the Microsoft company. So Gates contacted SCP again after talking with IBM, and obtained the rights for QDOS, non-exclusive rights for QDOS in December All right, right after talking with IBM, he bought non-exclusive license from them for $25,000. And 7 months later, after signing the deal with IBM, he bought all rights to the operating system. All right, that he licensed his new operating system to IBM as PC-DOS. All right. And again, it was a non-exclusive license. Gates retained the right to sell or license other operating systems. I'm sorry, that and other operating systems Microsoft develops to other computer manufacturers, which he called MS-DOS, their own product. All right. Now, Kildall was trying to offer IBM and others a CP/M license. You know, Kildall realized the deal was sour and everything, and he still tried to resurrect it. But his deal was rather costly, $240 a unit for each computer, whereas Microsoft was only $40 a unit. Okay, so over time, if you all remember, those of you that are old enough to remember all that, PC-DOS and MS-DOS soon dominated. CP/M was further and further sidelined, and it went into obscurity. So Microsoft and Gates, by his skullduggery, as it were, he established Microsoft as having the operating system paradigm, the standard, so to speak. Now, IBM was not, you know, they had concerns here. So the IBM PC soon became an enormous success in August of 1981. Almost all corporations had to buy them. So these computers flooded the market. IBM set the PC standard. All right. They had an open specification. All right. So that means all clones could be based on the IBM specs. And there were a large number of clones that developed. All right. Kildall, at this point, you know, with the operating system that Microsoft was selling to IBM, he was crying foul. He's saying, you know, you threatened copyright infringement, but there was no action taken. IBM soon realized their mistake with Microsoft, with the operating system and everything. You know, MS-DOS separately was becoming the standard for the clones. One of the big clones was Compact Computer, which was huge then and is huge now. Also, internationally, IBM was losing market share in Europe, Japan, South America to these clones. So IBM was getting very, very unhappy with the deal that they had made with Gates on the operating system. And later, Microsoft developed their own other suite of programs, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Office. And this is all going up against industry standards, such as WordPerfect. All right. Microsoft introduced Windows in 1985. IBM thought, you know, IBM tried to seize the initiative back. So they wanted to reset the operating standard. They said, we're going to have operating system 2 for the IBM PS2, all right, the new machine they're going to develop. So starting in 1985, Bill Gates was writing all the code for this, all right? They had a joint development agreement with Microsoft. So IBM, even though they're antagonistic a bit on a market level against each other, they still were working together. So OS2 released in 1987, 88, and 89. At this, you know, Microsoft Windows 3.0 came in 1990, and that was a graphical user interface, and that was it. That just changed things forever. Okay. The OS2, it was just paled by comparison. So the Microsoft Gates relationship unraveled later that year. Windows was soon bundled with all new computer purchases, and it was a death knell for the OS2. All right, it became a separate package to buy, and there were ways of making it port with Microsoft Windows and all. It just became more and more problematic, and it's gone. Okay, Microsoft came out with the XP in 2001, Windows 7 in 2009, Windows 8 2012, and we know from then on. Also, at the same time all this was happening, there was the browser war. So let's not forget that. You know, Netscape and others were fighting it out, and Microsoft's involved in that as well. So, you know, no deal. IBM, you know, if you're dealing with a large corporation, you know, IBM is impatient. They were in need. They were desperate. Kildall lost out this deal because of his delay and his absence. All right. And his later offer was unacceptable. It could not be cured. So don't be afraid of Big Brother, so to speak. Gates took the initiative. All right. Got non-exclusive licenses from them. It's incredible. Well, anyway, you got to understand what the need is at that time. All right. Gates saw the advantage in Kildall's mistake, right? Instantly. Right? When IBM called him up saying, "What's this guy Kildall? What's going on? You said he would sell us CPM." Gates realized that, we can do something here. And he negotiated with IBM for an operating system, even though he didn't own it. He had no code. But IBM didn't know that. And the development of the IBM machine at that time didn't require him to own up to it at that moment. Anyway, it was an incredible amount of business savvy going on. And Gates kept control of his code and the company throughout all this. He rode the bear, I think is what they used to call it. So they leveraged everything to create new ventures. So Gates was a visionary, all right? Similar to Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, different sort of visionary, but equal stature. Now, later on, there was antitrust issues and things like that in the early 2000s. And that was a bad time for Microsoft, but there hasn't been any further antitrust issues. So IBM's due diligence, they did due diligence at the time, right? For what they needed. For the Skunk Works know that. They had all the physical specifications for the machine. What they lacked was the vision for what the machine would ultimately entail. What is the computer for? It's to run software. So you would think that they would have thought this out and at the time and realized this. But, it's just like Xerox, they did not see past the hardware. Now, the story with Xerox is that, Xerox makes the printers. All right. But in the 70s, Xerox, which is headquartered in New York, also had a facility in California, where it had a bunch of guys in bean bags who were coding, things like that. And they came up with crazy things like graphical user interface, dealing with a mouse, and basic things we understand now is essential for computing. They had all these ideas. And separately from me, Steve Jobs got many of those ideas from Xerox PARC and incorporated it into the Apple and made it Apple the quintessential computer company it is now. All right. So, but these suits in New York for Xerox did not see the advantage of this. They were making money hand over fist on the printers. They didn't think about the future. All right. They didn't see a value in these computer things and with these weirdos in California and the beanbags were doing. They didn't value that or treasure that at all. Things might be different now, but I mean, this is the 70s, okay? Even into the 80s. So, I mean, this is an incredible lost opportunity. Xerox could have been bigger than IBM, Apple, and Microsoft combined, had they seen the vision for this. They had the people there with software. They had the people there with all the software tools to make it happen, but they just didn't see the vision. So just like that, IBM lost their own opportunity to control the code. All right. You got to understand the new technology. Gates kept control of his intellectual property. All right. Only non-exclusive licenses. All right. IBM, again, for their lack of vision, decided to farm it all out and lost control. All right. They thought having control of the physical machine was all they needed, which was true for the mainframe, these big devices that they had. Again, they were stuck in that paradigm of thought where you have a big device and it needs to be serviced. So you send some IBM people out there and they service it. So they were thinking that maybe they can make money that way, servicing the machine, not the software code that's running on the machine. So anyway, There was the unbundling aspect was in 1969. Up until that point, the hardware and the software was all one thing. There was no, whatever software, if you want to call it that, was hardwired into the machine. All right. It was not portable. It could not be taken from this machine and used on another machine. But the industry, primarily IBM at that time, realized that it might be advantageous to have software that is portable and useful with other machines, maybe their own machines or perhaps machines of other people. So there was a great unbundling in 1969. You would think some of the visionary in 1969 would have seen the value of the software. But anyway, Gates was a very skilled engineer and an entrepreneur. He was a savvy businessman. So he's what, number 2, 3 richest man in the world now? So you figure it out. All right. Okay. Now let's look at some Pyrrhic and other victories. All right. Pyrrhus was a Hellenistic king that got into a lot of battles with the Romans and others, and he got his moniker Pyrrhic victory. I think his country was Epirus. He got his Pyrrhic victory moniker because he won some battles, but he lost so many people in these battles. It became a Pyrrhic victory. Now, Proctor and Gamble. Okay, we all have our thoughts on Procter and Gamble. All right, they're very well known in consumer products industry and in many aspects. But in the early 80s or late 70s, perhaps they thought they wanted to get into the cookie business. They bought the Duncan Hines cookie company and or developed a brand. I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly. And they had a patent on the cookie. So they had an immediate and intense competition when they came out with this cookie. And there was corporate espionage and all that other, a lot of stuff involved and everything. It was incredible. When I was a junior attorney, I was involved in this case. So let's set the scene. Okay, you have Nabisco brands, Frito-Lay and Keebler, the naughty Keebler elves, were out there developing competing products against this Duncan Hines cookie. Now, what was the Duncan Hines cookie? It was a cookie that had hard sugar on the outside, sucrose, and soft sugar on the inside, fructose, which is gooey, all right? So the patent was a process for making it. So you insert the fructose inside a shell of sucrose, all right? And the purpose of that was when you eat it, it creates a mouth effect. It feels to your mouth as if it's just out of the oven, all right? Just like mom used to make or whatever. So it's just out of the oven and it had that mouth feel. And that's what made it very, very popular. So popular that all this competition developed right away, okay? So anyway, they got the patent and the day that patent issued, they sued in district court in Wilmington, Delaware in 1984. Let the cookie wars begin, that's what it was called. So in this case, I was a junior, actually I was a law student at the time. They had a lot of skullduggery going on, Nabisco. They entered the Duncan Hines bakery. They were looking over the transom, trying to figure out the process. How are they making this thing? They were trying to figure it out. And then when they were confronted, they jumped into an inconspicuous white Lincoln Town Car in an alley in Chicago. And they sped away. Keebler, they flew over a Duncan Hines manufacturing plant trying to figure out the trade secrets. This is a classic trade secret misappropriation move, where you pretty much have large chemical companies, they build these facilities. So what happens is a competitor will fly over with a plane and a camera and take pictures of these facilities. And again, armed with that, somebody skilled in the area can replicate what's going on in that. So anyway, there was a famous trade secret case on that where it was deemed misappropriation. All right. So anyway, Keebler is doing that. Frito-Lay had an employee that sort of like impersonating a P&G customer to attend a confidential sales meeting. So there's all kinds of, there's lots and lots of these types of things going on in this. It was intriguing to see it all. So anyway, the Duncan Hines, what it represented was P&G's entry into the cookie business. Again, P&G was known for all the household products and consumer products and everything, but they were not known for cookies. This was a threat to the established cookie people. All right. So they did not want P&G getting a toehold in this area. They did not want PG to start taking market share from their products. All right. So it was a hard-fought patent battle. I mean, this was there was patent issues, there was unfair competition, trade secret. I think it was antitrust in there as well. I mean, it was all geared up for trial. In December of 1989, I was finishing up law school. There were 200 witnesses, 120,000 pages of testimony, and it settled on the courthouse steps before trial. It was an intense effort. And as an attorney and everything, it's good for the client and everything, but you're geared up for trial. You have all your briefs, all your statements, everything ready, and your witnesses and everything, all that's ready, and then it's gone. But it happens quite a bit. So that's just the way it is in litigation. So it ended with a consent judgment. All right, 89. It was signed by District Court Judge Longobardi. It declared that PG's patent was valid and enforceable, all right, because there were many challenges being made to the patent itself. And by virtue of the settlement, they agreed to no future infringement by the defendants, all right? The defendants, they reached a settlement where these products of the defendants were not deemed infringing, all right. There was a $125 million judgment, all right? I'm sorry, settlement. It was one of the largest at the time, all right? So Nabisco and Keebler, they had about $53 million each. Frito-Lay for about $20 million, all right? And that settled the cookie wars. But it was a Pyrrhic victory, you know. Duncan Hines was a good product, all right? But Duncan Hines, by virtue of this, used to be called infringement, was losing market share due to that competition, all right? So they had total market share, and then all of a sudden new products are popping up to siphon off market share from them. Primarily the Chips Ahoy cookie, which is the mainstay now. Okay, which again uses the same concepts: the fructose on the outside, on the inside, and the sucrose on the outside. But this victory that they had effectively got P&G out of the cookie business entirely. So it was a sad thing, but that's in big corporations and everything. That's what happens. So with that, I am done. I think I'm ending rather early. But if anybody has any questions, by all means, let me know. Okay.
Thank you. That was extremely interesting, very entertaining. I learned lots of things. So if anybody has any questions, you can either submit them via the Q&A, or you can also raise your hand, and I can unmute your mic and you can ask your question that way. Okay, Franklin, go ahead. I unmuted your mic.
Hello, my name is Franklin, University of Maryland student, College Park. I have a question, but I would rather ask it if we're done, or if we're done, I can ask it now, or I can ask it at the end.
No, you can ask it now.
Go ahead.
So I was wondering about the way Microsoft kept a very large portion of the market, and the way they patented the software that they had. So my question is, nowadays, sometimes people build codes, softwares, and you can see how the software behaves, but you might not be able to see the specifics of how the software was built behave in that way. And my question is, how does the US patent laws protect that type of idea? Like you build something, people see how it behaves, but nobody knows how you put the pieces together, because the code is protected. It's basically it was compiled. When it's compiled, you just have a bunch of ones and zeros, and you just know how it works, but you don't know how it internally does everything. So I was wondering how the US laws protects that.
Okay, I can address some of that. Again, I only, with Microsoft, let me give a caveat here. I only addressed a lot of things in the early Microsoft years. I'm not addressing whether or not maybe they had undue influence and pressure and antitrust and everything after the 2000s. All right, I'm not going to step into that and everything. Now, with code in general, stepping out of Microsoft, just looking at the situation in general with code, yes, code, there's two types of, there's the code that's readable by a human, and then there's the executable code, which is just zeros and ones, which is only readable by the particular machine into which the computer is, that program is loaded. Now, as for protection, companies over time with code have applied a variety of things. Up until the 70s and things like that, you know, the software was bound with the machine. Remember, the unbundling. These are two things: physical and the software was all one. So people did obtain software patents before that, but they were very specific and geared to physical devices in a certain way. After the unbundling and the development of software code programs, or as we call them now, apps, you know, these things are just pieces of code. Now, how do you protect that code, especially if it's something that's fairly simple? Well, nowadays, you know, you could protect it by virtue of patent, where you would get a patent on the particular functions that the code implements. All right. Now, you could also get a copyright on the code itself, whether it's the printed out version of the executable code or the the human readable version, which is for the programmers. So you can get a copyright on those works, as it were, and you could file that in the Copyright Office and obtain copyright protection, so that people cannot copy that version of the code. Now, a copyright cannot stop somebody from looking at it and then adapting and making something of their own. All right. And if what they make is sufficiently different from what you've done, then you would have no copyright claim to it. However, if it's related sufficiently, then you would still have a copyright claim, whether or not they copied it directly or similarly. Now, another tool that software people need to use, perhaps, is trade secret, where you do not publish the code itself or the written version so anybody can read. This runs against the open software movement, open source movement, and all that. So that there you're making everything free, completely transparent. That's one approach. Another is to make it completely untransparent by keeping the code itself as a trade secret. And then people would not be easily able to copy it. They may be able to reverse engineer it and effectuate the same thing. In other words, you can look at the code. Okay, it does this. When if this happens, then this has to happen. And you could, go on and create all the rules for this. This was how it was done with the many of the clones early on. What was this? They looked at what the IBM did and they made their own version of that. So anyway, with software, there are a variety of tools you can use to protect your idea, the implementation of your idea, the expression of your idea. All right. But which intellectual property to use depends on the situation and which one's of more value. Now, at this time, where we are right now, software code is being questioned a bit, and it's a little harder to get patents on software itself. I think the tide might be changing. It's going to come back to being able to more easily get software patented. However, right now we're in a situation where copyright would have the strongest measures, where you can get damages into the millions of dollars very easily if somebody rips you off. So with that, let me go to the next question. If you have any further questions on that, my contact information is there. You can please feel free to email me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, I'm looking at the questions and talk about a diaper case. Yeah, when I was at that law firm, it's called Morgan and Finnegan. They're not around anymore. They also had a lot of diaper patents. Now, again, their client was P&G at the time, so I got to learn all about diapers, all the technology with diapers and things like that. And that's an intensely competitive industry. If you're new parents out there and everything, you're buying this stuff, you see yourself how intensely competitive it is out there. So, and the technology is always advancing in this area. The more absorbency, control any possible leakage and all these other things. There's all these tools and techniques that go into these things. So it was incredible. And there are a lot of more, I'll use the word scatological elements of this, but I don't want to get into it. I'll gross you out. Okay, let's see. Are there any cases where inventors made good money from their inventions? How can a small inventor best protect themselves? Well, the first thing you need to do is to secure some kind of patent rights on your idea. It's because they've changed the law in 2011 to make it more of a first to file system. And it is more imperatively in your interest to get something on file before you either discuss it with a group, you go to a conference and talk about it, you write a paper and post it, or whatever, you disseminate the idea in any way. It is more imperative now than ever to file for a patent application first. Now, once the patent application is on file, then you can talk to a potential manufacturer of the product. You can talk to a potential buyer or a licensee or whatever. But the prerequisite to all these things is to have something on file, all right? And so many times people come to me and they've already talked about it extensively. And also another thing, by talking about it, you compromise your international rights. Let's say that you have an idea and you start talking about it in an open fashion on the internet, all right? So you may have compromised your US rights at that point. You may still have US rights, but you may have compromised them. But you have killed international rights. Now, why do you care? Because you want to sell, most of you are going to want to sell your idea to somebody else, all right? And if you have the patent for that, then a company which is probably going to have divisions in other countries, they'd like to take that patent and file it over there too. But if by virtue of your actions or inactions, you've done something to compromise that, well, you've compromised the asset. So you will not get as much money for that asset as you thought you might, all right? So the foreign filing aspect can be key. It can be critical to certain companies. So that's why when I talk to clients and everything, I advocate that to them to at least secure the option for foreign filing. And then at some point down the road, you have to pick the countries and all that. But if you do something early on to compromise that, then that option is completely gone and the value of the asset is compromised. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, and I don't see anything in chat. Well, I want to thank everyone for attending today. I hope you found it entertaining. Like I said, there's so many of these stories out there with people like Gary Kildall. Had he just been there that day, had he been cooperative with IBM, we would not even know who Bill Gates is. I mean, It's incredible to think about these things. For the lack of signing an NDA, Gary Kildall is a footnote in history, and Bill Gates is out there, number 2 or 3 richest man in the world. So,
Yep.
so anyway, I'm going to be creating, like I said, a version 2 of this where I talk about other inventive scenarios and other people that have made good or lost out, with the deal or no deal in other things. So with that, I want to thank the inventors, and I'm going to turn it back over to Allah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ray. This has been very illuminating and very interesting indeed to learn about the history and to learn about various cases and some of the things that may or may not have happened in our history. Oh, here's one more question if you have time.
Okay, what is the difference between going to a private lawyer versus searching on the internet for a patent service? Well, many of you may have seen these things late at night, file a patent and things like that with a caveman or something like that. A lot of these things are not legitimate, in my view. And there's a lot of, fraud cases that are happening with them. They will not necessarily meet your need. Yes, money is tight now with COVID and everything, but you'll get what you pay for. And so that's why it's usually the best scenario to hire an outside attorney, like perhaps myself or another law firm, where they're going to give you a view of the law, so to speak. These services on the internet and these services on the cable and all that, from what I'm seeing, they give you a subpar product, and again, you want to create an asset, and the value of that asset has to do with a lot of factors. And if you don't meet those factors, you don't pay attention to those factors, then your asset is going to have minimal value. All right. And another question is, how can I keep patent costs and lawyers' fees down? Well, you can negotiate with the attorney, perhaps, and as to how much to charge for something. And maybe the attorney will agree to that. But you got to also remember that the attorney is a professional in their own right. All right, you go to a doctor and for a diagnosis and things, you don't say to tell the doctor, can he, do it for half of that or whatever. I mean, or a plumber or whatever. So we are professionals, and some of these things take time. All right, but you can negotiate with the attorney, and you could come to an agreement with them on that. And I will say, of late and everything, there are a lot of people with COVID and everything. They're coming up with lots of ideas and everything. But when I talk to them about the money and all this other stuff, because it's going to have to be some, because there are government fees involved as well. Some people get cold feet at that point. So just a matter of, work with the attorney and talk with them. What would they be comfortable paying? All right. Let's see, or some other arrangement. There's more questions here. You mentioned the vision in Microsoft's case, so important. Hold on. You mentioned vision in Microsoft's case. So how important do you think vision is in an industry? If you're, let's say you're in a fast moving industry, okay, where especially none of these things nowadays, where the technology is shifting constantly, you've got to ride that. You've got to move with that. For example, I have a client right now. I will not mention anything, but the technology is as it was 5 years ago. The technology has matured. So you need to address the mature part of it now. All right. So just, because that is what is of value now. What you filed before has value also, but so does the new aspect, which, would have the latest terminology, the latest advances in there, the latest interconnections of the technology. I mean, we're on the cusp of 5G now. I mean, the Internet of Things. Where your car can talk to your refrigerator and things like that. This is an incredible advance. So what we're going to have is we're going to have an explosion of people thinking of new connections, new ways of doing things, and that's going to manifest itself in patents. So vision, getting back to the question, vision is important. You need to have the vision of where your company is. If you're stuck in a certain paradigm, like, you know, with the printers and things like that, you can't think of computers, even though you have a team working on that. That's a problem. All right. So you got to try to think outside the box every now and then. So, is it true that a patent that is poorly written can be overturned even after being granted? That can cost more later. Well, yeah. I guess this gets back to the question earlier on if you use these late night services and things like that. Some of the patents that you get from services like this once they're challenged, they immediately fall. Okay, or the claims are not. There's a certain part of the invention called the claims. They don't have enough teeth to grab onto other products. In other words, to capture infringement. All right. So you want to have a well-drafted patent with good claims so that it'll have value. Again, this is the value of the asset. And I will say, any company that's worth their salt, when they look at the patents and things like that, they'll make this determination whether the patent has value, whether the patent has teeth and it can be asserted. All right. That's what they want. Maybe a big company wants to take that patent, file it in Germany, and sue somebody in Germany. You know, it happens all the time. Here's another question. If I am super prepared, that can help keep costs down. What exactly can I prepare on my side that will save money, or should I leave it all to the attorney? Also, how late can I get info to you prior to filing? Okay. Obviously, you know, the attorney is using myself as an example. You need to do a write-up of your idea. Your idea exists in your brain. All right. If I could reach into your brain and grab the idea and put it on paper, I would do that. But I can't. You know, I'm not the visionary that the inventor is. I can understand most inventions. I can take what you've written, expound on that, put in the patent requirements, craft the claims around it, and to the extent necessary, work with you to be sure that that concept is captured. But you do need to bridge the gap, so to speak, from your brain to the page, and putting it into a Word document, giving that to the attorney is good. Drawings are going to be it's not a huge expense, but it is an expense. I always tell people that don't spend a lot of time on drawing. I've seen people spend hours making accurate drawings and this, that, and the other, which is important, yes, but you know, you don't necessarily have to, you as the non-professional in this area, do that. There are drafting people out there that can do a drawing like that. And that is more important, all right, to your time. So it may be a few $100s or so for the draftsman fee, but it might be the best use of your time. I would say put the time getting the information out of your head to the page. That is the more important time. Or should I leave it all to you? Sometimes clients do that. All right. They leave it all to me. They have the idea and it's 3/4 of an idea and everything. And I have to take that and like bread and leaven it and mold it and create that as a patent. So sometimes that happens. It's more costly to the client. Yeah. But sometimes, you know, people can't be bothered by putting it from here to the page. And that's just the way it is. But to the extent you can give the attorney a good write-up. If you need to know, what I would say, if you want to know what kind of a write-up the attorney wants, it's going to look something like what a patent looks like. All right, that kind of structure. So a lot of that you can do yourself. All right, and that way the attorney is going to be editing it instead of creating it. All right, which is going to save significant money. Okay, how late can I get it? Well, I have clients contact me in the afternoon saying, I'm going to give this talk tomorrow, which means I pretty much have to file it tonight. And it's maddening at times and all that. And so I would not necessarily do that because it's unprofessional, but nonetheless, these things happen sometimes. So I will make accommodations for a client that where you have a situation like this, where you immediacy is key. Okay. I'm glad I stopped early because we had lots of questions.
Yeah,
Okay.
lots of good questions. Thank you for all the questions.
But again, you know, I'm an intellectual property person, an educator, and I am in the process of writing a book on this. So I'm very, this is something that interests me quite a bit.
Mhm.
All right. So is that it?
Well, if there are no more questions, I'd like to thank everybody who came and stuck around for the questions, and thank you to those who submitted the questions. And most of all, thank you to Ray for delivering yet another very interesting lecture for us.
Well, again, if anybody has any questions whatsoever, there's my contact information. And I'm happy to answer your questions. Or if you have questions on price and things like that, we can negotiate those things as well. It's just a matter of my operating mantra is a lot of people have wonderful ideas, and it's a shame sometimes that these things are being lost, you know. And but that's just, you know, especially over money. You know, you can have a small investment and then you can transform into a major investment. But that's just the way it is. But I'm happy to help any client out in need. So please feel free to reach out to me.
All right, thank you so much. And have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.